All right, what's up, AP Euro team? We are going to get after a little bit of meta writing and analysis of writing for the Unit 5 partial LEQ about the French Revolution. At this point in time, you have already written your partial LEQ. You've gotten your feedback back, and a lot of you guys got comments such as, hey, check out this video. This is the video I'm asking you to check out. Don't want to overtalk it. Let's hop right into it. Here we go. In this particular LEQ, you were tasked with breaking down the various grievances of the groups that made up the Third Estate in France on the eve of the French Revolution. Then you were asked to analyze the extent to which, so you're going to figure out like which one of these groups was able to and how able were they to go ahead and address their grievances. Now, a couple of things right off the top I want to get after here. You need to make sure that you break down all the various groups of people. It's not just the Third Estate as one particular block, and it's not going to be just the one group that you are going to analyze vis-a-vis your thesis. You need to break down all of those various groups at some point in time in your historical context. Then you're going to cherry pick out one particular group. You're going to say, this is who the group is. Here are two of their grievances. That will set you up for two subtopics. And then you're going to say, like, hey, they were able to get this done, or they weren't going to be able to get this done. You don't have to go with success, but you do need to analyze the extent to which. So you could say, like, they kind of got it, but they kind of didn't. This group was able to secure their rights, but then the radical phase happened and they lost their rights, or whatever it might be. But you're going to have some sort of argumentation here. All right. Now, in terms of the overall writing, we're going to contextualize the thesis. We're going to break down a historically defensible thesis. We're going to infuse a couple of pieces of evidence. We're going to try to double dip here, and we're going to try to give two pieces of evidence that are historically relevant and two pieces of evidence that prove the thesis argument. And then we're going to analyze, right? And we're going to look for here, I think change is our best format here. The analyze the extent to which one of these groups was able to address a grievance. Essentially, was there a change? All right. So here we go. Let's start off first. Always want to start off with historical context. The best way to do this is to make sure you give roughly three details, three facts that are going to set up whatever your thesis is going to be. Now, we're talking about events in 1789. So I'm going to jump in time backwards and I'm going to look at events that are happening in the 1750 to 1788 time period. That's a really good span to go ahead and gather some information. I'm also going to need to set up the various groups of the different estate. Let me say that differently. I need to set up the different estates and then the group of people inside of the third estate so that I can move into my thesis. So I got a lot to do here. I'm only going to give myself roughly 5 sentences to get it done. I'll talk this through as I go. Here we go. Right. So prior to 1789, I'm going to choose that date purposefully because that's my starting point date up here. So prior to 1789, the citizens of France were dealing with a series of crises or crises. All right, don't worry, Sean. I got spell check on. You can judge me later. All right. Name checked you in the video. That's how important that spelling is to you, not me. I don't really care. All right. Anyway, so I've gonna set that up. Now let's go ahead and just break these down. There was a debt crisis created by the various wars France waged from, let's go 1750. Geez, typing not my strong suit all of a sudden. From 1750 onwards, including the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution. This issue was exacerbated by the fact that roughly all of the taxes in France were paid by the poorest people. Going back centuries, the French had created tax exemption for the clergy and the nobility. On the eve of the French Revolution, King Louis XVI. Uh-oh, look at that. Gotta fix that. King Louis XVI called the long dormant States General to meet in hopes of convincing the aforementioned groups to pay their taxes. All right. So at this point in time, let's go ahead and clean that up. At this point in time, we've got our various like issues, these sort of grievance creating issues set up. We've got a couple of various facts. I'm going to start transitioning now into that estates general so I can start to address the next step of my prompt, which is breaking down who's in the estates general, my different groups, before moving into my thesis argument. The estates general was made up of three groups. The first state was the clergy. The second state was the nobility. And the largest was the third state, jeez, which was comprised of, now I want to be economical here in my writing. Apparently I want to, state is not a word. All right. I'm going to be economical here and I'm going to hop into this section identifying the different groups and grievances and who's got which problems in this third estate section. So I'm going to do the first part right now by identifying the people inside of the third estate. Then I'm going to hit their grievances after that, right? I'm kind of transitioning out of historical context though, and I'm moving into this transitional piece of information before I hit up my thesis, right? So I don't need to hit all groups. I just need to be representatives, right? So I could say rural farmers, urban poor, the merchant class, and the emergent professional class known as the bourgeoisie. What do I do here? Oh, so close. Spell check wants to go with the French spelling. All right. And then in parentheses, I'm going to put like lawyers, doctors, etc. All right. So now I've got my groups identified. They don't all have the same issues. So now I want to set up my transition into my thesis by kind of breaking down who's angry about what. The rural farmers were angry about high taxes and the corvée forced labor system The urban poor were angered by high taxes and the price of bread. The merchants were angry about taxes and the lack of representation in the government, as were and then we'll hit in the bourgeoisie, right? Now I've got like my groups, who's angry about what. I've got that transitional piece. Now let's move into my overall argument. If I scroll it back up to the top real quick, I'm going to analyze the extent to which one of these groups was able to address their grievances during that time period. All right. While I'm going to go with a transitional sort of thing, like while the rural and urban poor were able to use violence to shock the system at various times. It was the I'm going to go with the bourgeoisie here, and you'll see why in a second. It was the bourgeoisie who were best able to address their grievances of overtaxation and underrepresentation by aiding in the destruction of the Ancien regime and by helping to create a constitution of 1791. All right. So let's pause there real quick. I've got my historical context. I've kind of set up the French Revolution, why it's occurring. I've kind of utilized this idea of this debt crisis and funding all of these various wars and everything else as a nice linking piece to the overtaxation grievance that we know existed during this time period. I have successfully listed out all the different groups of people within the third estate. And I have said that of all the groups, I think it's the bourgeoisie who are best able to address their grievances because they're going to aid in the destruction of the Ancien regime and they are helping to create a constitution, right? So I have created a historically defensible thesis. I have set myself up for some analytical framework by setting myself up for this change argument, right? And I'll just point out if I wanted to have some sort of counter argument, I have also set that up by talking about the rural and urban poor and the utilization of violence as a means for breaking up the system later on if I were doing like a run at complexity or a more fully bodied essay. But from here on out, all I need to do for this particular task is move into the Ancien regime section of my writing. And I'm going to talk about how the bourgeoisie was able to break down and help destroy the Ancien regime through their actions at the beginning of the French Revolution. All right. One thing before we transition out of this age and into the body paragraph, I also want you to notice I have left a lot of information out. That's my evidence. I wanted to keep anything that was taking place after 1789, and I want to hang on to that information. The only things that I've really given you in this piece of writing that even suggest or hint at any sort of change after 1789 are my various subtopics, right? Because if my argument is that the bourgeoisie was the group that was best able to address its grievances of overtaxation and underrepresentation, right? That's what I'm arguing. That's my argument right here. This section is my argument. My subtopics are that they were able to accomplish this by destroying or helping to destroy the Ancien regime and by helping to create the Constitution of 1791. Now, in this particular partial essay, like I said, I'm only going to break down the first subtopic, and I'm going to go in the order that I presented information. So it has to be the Ancien regime because then I have internally aligned structure to my essay. So this first subtopic becomes my next body paragraph. Has to, just by the way I've organized this thing out. So what we're going to do is I'm going to utilize some of the textual information, some of the things that we've talked about in the past, as a roadmap to help me with evidence, and then I'm going to work back to some sort of argument and say, like, how successful was this change of destroying the Ancien regime? All right. So for that, I'm going to set up another tab, and then we'll get started. Okay, so what I'm going to use in terms of like this other tab, this other piece of information are my highlighted readings, which I have here in digital format for you guys to be able to see as I work off of this. When you guys do your revisions, I'm going to highly recommend working your way back into the relevant readings. We had lectures 11, 12, and 13 from the history guide that I gave you guys in class. That'll be really helpful. I am working off of lecture number 12 here. I'm in the moderate stage. That's where I'm going to do the majority of my argumentation for the bourgeoisie. And I'm going to start pulling some evidentiary sort of pieces from this to help me out. Now, my author, my lecturer, notes very early on that this class difference was a huge problem for France, specifically the rights of tax exemption that were granted to the first two estates. And it was that third estate, made up mainly of bourgeoisie members, at the meeting of the estates general, right? These, like right here, third estate consisted of more than 600 solidly middle class deputies from the ranks of the government officials, lawyers, merchants, property owners, and other professionals. That's the group that I identified as my bourgeoisie in my historical context and transition section. I'm going to utilize this information as my first bit of evidence to prove that the bourgeoisie helped destroy the Ancien regime. And then I'm going to work my way a little bit further down through the tennis court oath and the creation of the National Assembly. I'm going to work past what was going on with the urban poor. That information does not apply to my thesis argument, right? That was my counter argument. So I'm going to work past that. And then I can work into the declarations of rights of man and the citizens. And then if I work down a little bit further in this particular essay, or excuse me, lecture, right? I've got this information right here about the National Assembly busied itself with reforms meant to dismantle the Ancien regime and these basic reforms. And I can pull from this, including the civil constitution of the clergy, as good evidence as well. So this is going to serve as my evidentiary document. This is where I'm going to pull my information. And I'm going to want to be really specific with the language that I choose here, because that language becomes illustrative examples. And then it does two things. One, it's evidence that's on topic, but then it's also evidence that proves my point. And that, my point being that the bourgeoisie helped destroy the Ancien regime. And that's going to give me 2 points if this were a full LEQ, right? So I always want to be really purposeful with the information that I select. I can get on topic information. That's just anything about the French Revolution and steps that were taken to address grievances. I want to double dip here in terms of not just topically accurate information, but also evidence that proves or supports the argument that I'm trying to make, right? So we can work back to these things if I need to. Again, this is not an SIQ, so I don't have to be hyper specific. I do want to use some coded language though for my AP reader to let them know, hey, this is evidence. I'm going to be a little specific here to help out. All right, so here we go. We're going to move here into our next paragraph. Again, Ancien regime and its destruction is going to be the topic. So let's just drop into that topic sentence and go from there. The bourgeoisie was instrumental in helping to destroy the unfair social hierarchy that was the Ancien regime. All right. This is the class system that granted special privilege to the clergy. We'll go clergy first. Clergy and nobility, including tax exempt status. Hey, I'm going to drop that in there because that was part of my arguments and my identification from above. Now, I've got my topic sentence set up. Here we go. Let's break down how they started to break this out. When the Estates General was called in 1789, 600 members of and then we'll go bourgeoisie here, arrived to represent the third estate. This group sought to overcome the unfair voting system of block voting, which granted one vote to each estate by voting by head, which would create a majority for the third estate. Right? Pulled that right out of my lecture. When this effort was resisted, the third state and liberal members of the other two estates, or clergy and nobles of the robe, ever I can be specific, why not, right? So I've got this evidence piece, helped create a breakaway representative group known as the National Assembly. This group sought liberal reforms, a constitutionally constrained monarchy, right? And equal taxation for all French citizens. All right, so I've linked the bourgeoisie to these efforts to destroy the ancien regime. I've got all of this information in here. That's evidence here. You can imagine me going through with my pen and I'm checking off that buzzword, sort of bingo-y sort of stuff. I've got all sorts of illustrative examples in place here. I've talked about the bourgeoisie's efforts in destroying the ancien regime. I've set all of that up. Now it's time for the payoff, and then I'll move into my analysis to close this thing out. All right, but I'm almost there with my other 2 points. I've hit that evidentiary standard for sure. I definitely have multiple pieces of evidence supporting my argument, but now I want to close this thing down by moving into my analysis, which is still going to have some evidentiary elements in it, but then at this point, I'm going to transition over to my last bullet point, analysis that fits your chosen format. That's my change format. I need to break down what sort of change actually took place, right? That's going to require some evidentiary information, but I'm transitioning now into analysis. So I've got something akin here to a PEE. Now I'm going to go block A, right? And inside of that analysis, I will also have some evidence, which will just drive home that point, sprinkle in that little bit of extra, make sure I get that evidentiary point. If this were the actual AP exam, right? There we go. Let's go ahead, finish this up. The National Assembly was eventually able to force the king and the monarchists in the first two states to accept their reforms, which ultimately led to the creation of two new documents that helped create political and social equality. I want to go back to that because that's what I'm talking about up here. This is this grievance, this group that wanted more. It was a bourgeoisie, right, who wants to have more political representation, right, a lack of representation in the government, also this equal taxation piece. So let's go ahead and nail that right now, right? We're totally set up for this. Both the Declaration of the rights of man and the citizens and the let's go ahead. We're down here. Let's pull the name for sure. The Civil Constitution of the Clergy. Right. Limited the special privilege of the first two estates while at the same time created an official recognition of the rights first described by John Locke, the natural rights of liberty and property. Right? Nice. See what I got there? This is all sorts of buzzworthy sort of stuff. Spelling issues aside, again, Sean, don't judge it too hard. That's what spell check's all for, right? That's why they put the red line under there to help out someone like myself, right? You too, one day might run into spelling issues, and then you'll love that spell check. Anyway, I digress. So I've got that evidence piece. I've got this evidence that's proving that change piece as well. Now, I've also set up this idea of the ability to actually create the change, right? I can work back here real fast if I want to, right? Regardless, between the October days of 1789 and September 1791, the National Assembly busied itself with reforms meant to dismantle the ancient regime, right? I've listed out a couple of those, the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen. I've got that right here. I've got my civil constitution of the clergy right here. That's going to eliminate these special privileges, right? I've got that place and I've got those ideas in place. I've even got some of this, like the Constitution of 1791 specified such liberal ideas as limited monarchy and a full equality before the law, right? I've got those rights of Locke that I've infused in there as well. I've got all that. Now, is there actually lasting change? That's the last part of my prompt that I need to actually consider, analyze the extent to which, right? Was this lasting reform? I'm going to have to go ahead and say, from a historical analysis standpoint, like, yeah, some of this stuff lasts for a while, some of it doesn't. There's like ups and downs throughout the course of the revolution. So let's be historically honest and forthright about what occurred here. And let's just close this out with my final analytical statement. While the gains of the liberal phase of the French Revolution are noteworthy, they did not last entirely. I'm going to hedge my bets here. While the nobility was smashed and would remain so even after the end of the revolution, during the Napoleonic phase of French history, the clergy were able to gain property and tax exempt privileges from the government. Still, the Ancien regime was smashed, and the lack of political representation and the unequal status of citizens that existed prior to 1789 ended for good. Right? And that's it. I am done. That is the end, all right, of my paragraph. Now, if I wanted to, I could set myself up with a transitional piece, right? And I could move more deeply into the Constitution of 1791, where maybe I talk about more equal representation under the law. But my goal here was to talk about the ways that the Ancien regime was smashed, the Declaration of Rights of Man and the citizens, the civil constitution of the clergy and the creation of the National Assembly all got rid of some of those special privileges that have been granted to the upper class. I have noted that some of these changes did not last forever, while others did, right? Which means I've analyzed the extent to which one of these groups was able to address its grievances during the time period. So I'm good to go there. I chose change as my format. Do I have at least two pieces of evidence that prove the thesis argument? Yep, I do. Do I have at least two pieces of historically relevant evidence? Yep, I do. If I go back down and hear all this information about the calling of the Estates General, who's in the Estates General, their meeting, all that sort of stuff. So I've got historically relevant stuff, and my evidence that supports my argument is also historically relevant, right? So I have that double dip there. Did I argue something that was historically defensible? Yes, I did. I proved it by going back into my source work to figure that out. And did I contextualize my thesis? Do you know why I am talking about the third estate and this group of people who were all pissed off and wanted to see change? Yeah, I think I did, right? In this section right here, I wrote down some of the issues in France, some of the major players and people involved, especially the third estate, who was inside of the third estate, which was something I needed to do in order to successfully address the prompt. So I've got all those pieces in place. I would say I have met all the markers of what I need to do. What you should do now is utilizing this video and some of the talking points and meta analysis that I laid out. Go back into your essay, see where you need to strengthen. Look at the comments and marks that I left for you. Look at that scoring guide so you can see your areas of emphasis and revision and go get it. You're going to do great. I believe in you. Talk to you later. Bye.